who is going to be on the right side of that? So these are all business judgments that the banks will have to make, and every organization is going to have to make. So I see those as the bigger challenges rather than the mechanics of what we've seen. Mechanics are all basic. Leverage. Now, I in fact was here giving a presentation 6 years ago on Islamic banking. And one of my slides actually said, people think bank deposits are safe. And I said, no, they're not safe, they are saved. So they are saved because the economy feels they're important at this point. One other thing that's going to change, and which is changing, is with the concept of unit trusts, direct investments, etc., etc. The importance of banks will also be challenged. So abhi to is dafa banks ko bacha liya gaya hai. I'm not sure whether the same will apply in the next crisis, because the warning is coming more and more frequently. So everyone has to look at their business model. They have to look at the pluses, the minuses on their balance sheet. What is going to, where are you going to get your returns? Which are your riskier assets? How diversified are you? And the more diversified you are, the safer you are. So ये जो retail deposits की बात हो रही है, one of the reasons is that it is very well diversified. And because it's diversified, it brings stability. But real issue is going to be, once the notion hits a bank that it is unprofitable or it is going to have problems, then there is no question of anybody saying कि I've been banking with this for 20 years and I'm going to stay here. अफगानिस्तान में जो हुआ, जो इस तरह आपने देखा, वो लाइनें लग जाएंगी. So the key thing is, which out of all of Basel III and Basel II and Basel I, is for people to re-look at their business model. And he was very right in saying you've got to look at your strategy, you've got to look at your strategic plan, look at which businesses make sense. But reading the economy is going to be one major factor which every bank is going to have to learn as a businessman. मतलब वो जो जब तक आप protected environment में हैं, जब तक तो ठीक है. My fear is over the next 10-15 years, the public's appetite to save banks will go down, both from a government point of view and also a need point of view also. That's also, अभी तो ज़रूरत पड़ रही है उसको बचाने की, because you say the spillover effects into the economy are going to be too huge. I think over the 10-15 years, or थोड़ा सा diversify होंगे, the whole model is going to change to a point where banks per se will stand alone as businesses. And the day that comes, that the backing behind the bank stop, that's the day that this will all make sense to everybody, because it will not be a regulatory issue. It will be a need issue from a business to say, I am going to do better than X because I am going to do X and Y and Z. Jo ye sari baatein. So that's really the challenge in the next 5-10 years, is to really understand where is the world economy going, where are the pain points, where are the issues. So that will show.
Right. Just wanted to add one thing to what you just said. Is that obviously the regulator recognizes that there is a certain level of moral hazard, that now that certain banks have been rescued, right? They may be looking forward to say another rescue in say XYZ years. So in order to prevent that, they have introduced the requirements of having trigger events in place. That first and foremost, your equity interest will take the hit of any losses that arises. Then the subordinated loan holders' share will also be converted to common equity. They will absorb losses, right? Then the individual government can make a decision as to whether it's going to bail out an institution or not, which is ultimately, obviously, the choice of the government itself.
वो पीछे देखो लाफिंग.
I just want to add something to what you both have said, that is there any use of Basel III, or does Basel III will help to contain global economic turmoil ahead in the future? Because if we look at the recent global economic turmoil, we will come to know that the losses has not arisen because of the defaults, but because of the credit migration and loss of liquidity. So, to what extent do you think Basel III will help the global economy in this regard?
Okay, that's a very good question. Something that we haven't gone into very much detail is the counterparty credit risk regulations, right? Which have been put in place for Western organizations. Obviously, local banks do not have a very material exposure in over-the-counter derivatives, which would lead to extremely large mark-to-market losses. There have been instances where, and obviously I won't disclose names, where a bank having, say, positions in, say, interest rate swap or cross-currency swaps has incurred losses, on account of being on the wrong side of basically a position which were impacted by basically large-scale market movements. However, in the Western markets, they have now introduced counterparty credit risk requirements. They want extensive modeling of what the estimated exposure at default would be. They have introduced a higher correlation figure that is going to be incorporated in that capital formula you have seen in Basel II, right? Which essentially shows a correlation between 12 to 24, that's going to be 15 to 20. It's not very computationally intensive, which is why obviously I haven't discussed it. And it's not material either, right? Because obviously I've discussed whatever is applicable to 99% of the bank's balance sheet. Indeed, there have been extensive regulations introduced to prevent such losses from arising in over-the-counter derivative trades. In fact, the relevant paper is with me. One is obviously it was, I think, the discussion paper issued in 2009 by the Bank of International Settlements. Even now I have that paper with me, so if you have a USB, I can let you have it. It's quite an interesting reading. Another element is obviously the market risk guidelines that were issued in July 2009, right? Which materially increased the market risk charge on taking positions, as well as incremental guidelines for default. So quite a lot of regulations have been put in place to basically prevent this from happening. In fact, the Basel Committee, what it has said is that, if banks move from doing over-the-counter derivative trades to having a centralized clearinghouse, right, which involves a daily, margining, it has its own capital, right, they would attract a much lower capital charge as such. Obviously, that hasn't been discussed in this presentation, but that's a very good question nonetheless. But quite applicable, and also quite applicable to, say, Western markets and internationally. But
in the absence of sound regulatory framework for derivative markets, because there isn't any governing body for derivatives market, like there is a SECP for Karachi Stock Exchange. So do you think if, like, Basel is BIS doing really fine, but because of the absence of the sound regulatory framework for derivative markets, does it help?
I mean, like I said, obviously regulations have been introduced by the Bank of International Settlements here.
Right, but there isn't any regulatory framework for derivatives market के जैसे derivative में किस किस्म की regulations होनी चाहिए, जैसे SECP regulations.
You mean regulations applicable
locally or internationally? Derivatives के लिए और कोई ये such regulatory framework नहीं है. Basel ने कह दिया कि आपने इस तरह से charge compute करना है, fine, good. लेकिन उसमें किस तरह से आपने निवेश करना है, कहाँ तक लेना है?
As I just stated earlier, there are 3 regulations. Then, see, there is a very extensive regulation for derivatives now in place that have been issued by the BIS in a discussion guideline which it issued in 2009, which involved computing capital charge on over-the-counter derivatives in the year 2009. Subsequently, they invited feedback. That guideline was finalized. The final document that was issued obviously is just 7 pages. But if you read the background of the number of documents that were issued, which also covered, by the way, risk charge to be computed for derivatives, over-the-counter derivatives, what you would know is